Like, had you ever written a play before?
I had never written a play before. I had written some poetry many years in the past, kept a journal on and off through my life. Expressing myself through writing was something that was always meaningful to me. BA in English, master's in English from UVA, as well as a long career as an elementary school teacher. So as I thought about it, I realized that my love of language and literature and drama and storytelling is a thread that just runs throughout my life. But no, I had never written a play before. This one just evolved as Isabel and I remarked sometimes when things were crazy, we feel like we're riding a wild horse, and sometimes it lets us have the reins, and other times it doesn't, and it kind of runs on its own. So we joked about that numerous times to reduce the stress that we did feel sometimes. But it was a new experience for me. So very worthwhile.
Always growing, always learning. That's a good way. Did you do your teaching in Charlottesville?
Mostly in Albemarle County. I started out my career way back in the 70s. I was a special ed teacher to start out with. At some point when I was burning out a little bit on special ed, I thought about becoming an art teacher. It runs in my family. My mom was good at the visual arts, and I have a sister who had an academic career as a professional photographer. And I thought teaching might be a way to go. I actually took some classes in it, but never actually tried a position as an art teacher. But arts and music and literature and drama have always been, at least in my mind and my emotions, a big part of my life.
Political groups, activist groups, any past involvement before IC?
My first taste of political involvement was during my undergraduate years at the University of Alabama, where I participated in some of the political uh, protest against the Vietnam War. But at that time, I was just a member of the crowd, not a member of any organized activist group. And then through the years, I've always thought of myself as a progressive, but I've never been a member of a political party. Always tended to vote Democrat, but didn't become politically active till February of this year, when I attended my first rally in Richmond at the State House in response to my concern about what was happening with the new Trump administration and seeing that they were going to move quickly to do the things they wanted to do. And so I just knew I had to get involved. And so soon after that, I looked for some like-minded people in Charlottesville. And somehow I found Indivisible, but I found myself in my first political Zoom meeting. I think you were there. I think Joe was there. I didn't know any of the participants. I was glad I had found my people because I could see that everybody there was kind of saying, we got to do something here. At that time, I had my hair on fire about it, and people were debating back and forth, well, should we have a rally or should we wait? And I was like, have a rally, I'll come. So the rest is history. I just, found my people, and so happy to have done so.
Oh, yeah. Well, your contributions have been huge all the way throughout. We're glad you did. Would you remember what group it was or how you wound up in Richmond?
I saw, I guess, on social media that I think it was 50501. It was just going to have a rally at the State House. So I didn't know anybody else that, was as upset about it as I was. And so I just bought two pieces of poster board and made a couple of signs and jumped in my car and just drove to the State House and joined all those other people.
You and John Smith were the two big proponents for Indivisible Charlottesville Needs a Band, right?
Yeah, we had gotten involved with you and Joe with the rally planning group, and it would come up occasionally in there. And then I learned about Signal and got on Signal. I was not familiar with that before. I was in several Signal groups people had talked about. I really can't remember who started the IC band Signal group. It wasn't me because I don't know how to start a Signal chat, but it was back in the late spring. John and I were both enthusiastic and frequent posters on that chat, sharing musical clips and wondering about the idea of having people who love music just gather informally on the downtown mall. We weren't thinking of it in terms of a huge production at all. We just thought, let's get some people together. Music, in the past has always been a big part of protest movements. The labor movement with Woody Guthrie and people like that. The music of folk protest, I knew the history of that. And as a progressive, I always appreciated the way they used music in the labor movement and back through the years. And political songs from when I was in college. Bob Dylan was an inspiration to me in those days. And so I just thought maybe get some people together. Maybe we'll meet at the Free Speech Wall, march around a bit, do some percussion or some kazoos, because, neither of us could play a musical instrument, but we just love music. So trying to find a way to just bring some joy and movement, maybe some dance, just some fun involvement, rather than just being all serious and channeling our upset about what was happening on the national scene in a more joyful way. These are the things that John and I talked about or envisioned. Isabelle and I had met back in the spring as two of the founding members of the Charlottesville Visibility Brigade, which was an offshoot also of the rally planning group, just a smaller group of like-minded people who wanted to just be very active in between rallies and get out there on bridges and overpasses and just anywhere we could to shout to the world what was going on and get people to pay attention. I'm still active in that. In fact, we have a deployment this afternoon. As I got to know her, I admired her can-do spirit, and her activist mentality, her quest for excellence in the way we developed and improved our signage for the Visibility Brigade and our deployments. Isabelle and I had both seen some of the Instagram posts of people from Europe and America having what they call funerals for democracy, dressing in all Black clothes and carrying signs or fake tombstones and playing dirges. And we watched a couple of those, and we both found that idea and its presentation to be very powerful. And we knew that we could do something similar. So as we talked about presenting some kind of funeral march and transforming it in some way, we started bouncing ideas off each other and just slowly evolved the idea of what we wanted to do. At first, as I said, it was all in the heads of the two of us. And then at some point, I think Isabelle, as I remember, started by writing down a kind of bare bones outline for what we had talked about. And then it developed. Isabelle, being the amazing organizational spirit that she is, immediately began contacting other people and bringing in other possible players, trying to reach out to get other people interested. Other people became interested through that IC band chat and through just people that we knew. So when we knew for sure that we had John Dirth's commitment to be involved as musical director, Isabelle called a group of us for a meeting at her house about it. And we sat around her kitchen table, and the ideas were flying in all different directions. And there was some, I don't want to say dissent, but among everybody there were different directions they all seemed to want to go. So John finally said, "I need to see a script. You have got to write it down." So Isabelle said, "Nancy, that's your job." So I was happy to take that job. From there, I sketched out, just sort of from the creative, dramatic point of view, what I thought could happen. But we went through many drafts, so many that I lost count, just communicating back and forth with Google Doc to develop it as it grew. She always seemed to have good ideas for, we could do this to make it easier. We could do this to make it better. I just appreciated somebody who always took the initiative to come up with ideas for making things better or more streamlined or more impactful, whatever it was. She always seemed to have good ideas. The interesting dynamic that developed between Isabelle and myself, she thinks very logically and precisely, and organization and structure, all that, as you know from knowing her, come very naturally to her. And she's very skillful at that. I recognized her as the leader of the project because I knew I didn't have the organizational skills to bring it all together on such a grand scale, and she did. So I feel like we worked well with each other there. I tend to think more intuitively, more in images, and in my mind, I see scenes of actions that are dramatic and tied to emotions. And so in our discussion, each of us brought that part of ourselves to the way it developed. And most of the time we could play off each other's strengths there, but sometimes it wasn't easy. Looking back, I guess I like to be open to changing things that we've decided if I get a new idea that I think would work better dramatically, for instance, and that I hadn't thought of before we set a certain structure in place. And then she might say, "No, we can't do that because the structure's already there. And if we change that part, we'll have to change these other things too. And I know that just won't work in the time that we have available to prepare." and to make the event happen. So that was a little frustrating to me. But then there were other times where I would say, no, Isabelle, we really need to put this part in, because if we don't, it won't have the emotional impact, or it won't make sense in terms of the dramatic transformation that needs to take place. And then at those times, she would understand, and she would bend a little bit and say, okay, we'll find a way to put that in. We had our back and forth. Those tombstones in particular, we saw how powerful they were. I remember having a discussion with Isabelle and saying, Isabelle, we've just got way too many tombstones. I don't think we're going to get enough people to carry them. And visually, it's probably just too many. And she said, no, every tombstone has on it a right or a freedom that has been threatened or taken away. People need to see that. And carrying it through the mall and having people, maybe people who hadn't been paying attention enough to know how many things actually were threatened. Each tombstone was a tangible reminder of that. From the beginning, we knew we didn't want to do just the funeral part. It was just too bleak and too somber. We wanted there to be, I at least had in my mind at that time, an element of transformation and redemption to whatever we would eventually develop. John Durst was very adamant that he did not want just a funeral. He seemed also to be the same place we were at emotionally and mentally, and wanting it to model action and transformation of the negativity of the moment into something positive. Old ideas that we initially liked, I can't really think that there were. We did, as I said, new ideas would come in from time to time. As a perfectionist, I wanted it to be as perfect as it could be. But as we brought in more and more people, and these people got involved and had their own ideas, then I knew that we all had to work together to make it happen in the time frame that we had, because we had already committed to the November 1st date. I think we had almost a month, but even that was not enough time from my perspective, as far as perfect as I would like it to be. But it turned out to be very effective nevertheless.
Oh my God, absolutely.
So that was some of the creative process stuff that went on kind of behind the scenes.
When did these conversations start? Like when John Durst was invited in, and some stuff happened in September, or was it even happening earlier, like in August?
No, not as early as August. And in September, maybe she and I were talking about it, but hadn't really initiated anything. Or at least I had not. Maybe she had, Isabelle, but I had not. We were just talking about it. Seems like it was around October 1st. We had that meeting at her house with John. And at that time, as you recall, we had No Kings coming up in mid-October. Can't remember the exact date. And then there was even talk that another event would take place at McIntyre Park. Remember, there was all that flux going on and different people having different ideas. And then we got kind of scared about our project, because we said, oh no, how are we going to get what we need to put this on? Limited resources and people's involvement with different things. But then it all worked out. The McIntyre Park event kind of receded into the future, and I hope is still in the future to come. And we did our part for No Kings as best we could at the same time. In those first 2 weeks of October, during the planning for No Kings, we also were working and beginning to gather people and props and ideas together. At least that's my memory of how it developed. So once No Kings was in the books, we started intensively working together. We went to Wonderground and one of their practices and met their people and, kind of forged our bonds with them. That's how we found Emily, whom we did not know beforehand. I think what was really just magical to me was once we got it started, it's like talented people just came out of the woodwork, and we were just able to find them, or they just appeared serendipitously to help us bring our vision to life. We had those four main people. We had Sage, Rich, Dana, and Emily were the four main actors. Of course, we had many wonderful people, but they in particular were key to just pulling it all off dramatically and visually. And we knew we wanted to work with Sage at the beginning, because we had seen her in her role as Lady Liberty at the science rally in the spring. She and Mary Stewart and that group of people. I had seen them then in the little drama that they put on where Lady Liberty is sick. And so Isabel and I said to each other when this idea came up, we have got to have Sage again reprise her role as Lady Liberty. She was willing. And so what a tour de force in her role. I mean, the traditional masks in the classical Greek drama of tragedy and comedy, the one very sad and the one very, very happy. I just thought she just evoked the whole range of emotions in between those two poles from tragic to joyful comedy. Just embodied the transformation that I hoped would be seen in the production. She was just key to bringing that about. Just can't say enough about what a wonderful, wonderful job. She just inhabited that role so beautifully.
Oh, she was great. She really was.
I also want to shout out Rich Leahy. Neither Isabel nor I knew him. Jillian had met him at a postcard writing event or something. She knew his personality was such that he probably had been involved before in some theater things. I was so glad to have him in that role of the first activist, because when he showed up to do our practice in the event space on the mall, there was the first that I had met him. And as soon as I saw what he was able to do, I just said, yes, the universe has sent us this person who's going to take over this key role. See, at first, Isabel had kind of assigned me that role. And me, I'm kind of a shy person and like to be in the background of things, and was having to screw my courage to the sticking place, to quote Shakespeare, to take on that role, and was not really wanting to do it. But when he came and was just so willing and so capable, we said, okay, he's the first activist. And then I just got to do that little part where, he called on me and I held up the tombstone and he said, is this what we want? And, and I was like, no, so that worked out real well. Dana Palmer, who also was one of the founding members of our Visibility Brigade group and is very active with us in that group, had volunteered out of the blue to be the Grim Reaper. She had a Grim Reaper costume, and she said to Isabel that she would volunteer her services for that role. And when Isabel told me that she had volunteered, at first I was like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't envision, a villain role. How is this going to work? Is it going to work? Is it going to be too melodramatic? I wanted it to be dramatic, but I didn't want it to be too melodramatic, to the point where people would laugh, and say, oh, this is just a silly little, how it's so easy for a villain to, in a dramatic role, if they don't play it right, it just hits wrong. So I was hesitant, but then she met with us, practiced in the space. Rich came, she was there too, and she kind of showed how she would interact with Rich and with Sage. And earlier, Isabel and I also thought of a way that Sage and the Grim Reaper would interact during the sad mourning procession, that the Grim Reaper would lurk around, kind of stalking her and bullying her. Again, I was a little worried it was going to be too melodramatic, but they both played it perfectly. It hit the right emotional tone, which at first I didn't know whether it would or not. The last person I want to talk about is Emily. With about 10 days to go, we were kind of getting to the point where we were like, oh, are we going to be able to pull this off in the time that we have? And so Isabel said, we've got to go to the Wonderground practice and see what songs they're planning and how they're going to do the songs. And we want John to come too, because he's the musical director. And so we've just got to try to pull some things together. And so we went out to the little church where Wonderground practiced. We kind of sat in the background as their group gathered. And then when they were ready to begin, they said, y'all can't sit back there in the back. Come on up here with us. So they made room for us and for me and Isabel. And at that point, we had involved Susan McCulley already in the choreography. So Susan came with us that night, and Rich showed up that night. So the four of us were kind of enfolded into their practice that night. And we all had a very productive exchange between John and the Wonderground folks, Craig as their leader, of course, and Cleo. And most of the people there must have been 20-something people there, most of whom we didn't know. But we sat with them in a big circle and talked about it and practiced the songs. And The four of us sang along with them and just had a wonderful exchange. And then at some point, John said, you know what? We need a parade leader. I always love creative ideas, but then when I'm under the gun, I'm kind of like, oh no, another role that we need to try to, incorporate here. How is this going to work? Is it going to work? And so people were looking around the room, and several people said, hey, Emily, how about you? And I didn't know who Emily was, but I looked at the person they were all looking at and talking to, and she was sitting there with this funny little smile on her face. And then she said, sure, why not? I'll do it. And I still don't know what, if any, background she has that she had brought to the role. Because John was talking, oh, you remember back in high school where the high school band would play, and then you have the drum major out in front in the big, fancy outfit with the carrying the baton. You keep the time of the music and keep everybody marching well. So we kind of conceived it in that role as a kind of a parade leader. And so we just decided, okay, we'll put her out in front. We need somebody to kind of pace the group anyway and make sure we get down the mall and back all together. And so she was willing to do that. She showed up that day in her black outfit, black from head to foot, except those little red socks you could see peeking out at the bottom. And it was her job to carry the flag. Isabel and I had decided we would wrap the flag in chains because there was some talk about carrying the flag upside down and a debate on the band chat about that. People weighing in, some people saying, yes, it's got to be upside down because we're in distress about this. And then I was making the point that, no, wait a minute, we don't want to alienate people. I've carried the flag upside down many times, and I always carried upside down in our visibility actions. But I did not want that to happen in this parade because I knew their public would be on the downtown mall, and there might be people among us who were upset. In fact, I will tell you, there was a little incident. I can't remember whether I told the group about it in PPR or not, but we had done an initial practice, just Rich and Isabel and myself in that octagonal space near the Omni, the Whiskey Jar, the Code Building. And we had brought one of the tombstones. She had just randomly picked the one that said no vaccines or something. And we were using it as we tried to think through how the action was going to take place in that space. At some point, a stranger walked by and read that tombstone. And from about 10 feet away, he started yelling at us. And he said, my dad died of cancer a month after he got that COVID vaccine. And F y'all. And then he turned and walked off. We all looked at each other like, uh-oh. At the Dollar Tree we had seen and had picked up the chains that we were going to wrap a Lady Liberty in. So we got some little pieces of those chains and wrapped the flag in it for Emily to carry at the head of the parade. And that, I think, made a tremendous statement with her all in black, with her parade baton being the big American flag wrapped in chains was, I thought, just genius in the way that developed. So she was great on the way down, in the morning part. And then I did not even see her transformation after we ripped the pieces of paper off the signs, and, we all threw the signs into the coffin and took off our black clothes and threw that into the coffin while we were all singing and dancing to Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. And so I was all involved in that, enjoying it, but also trying to make sure that it was going to go off as planned. And suddenly I saw her just dancing out across the space in what appeared to be a combination of Dr. Seuss and Uncle Sam. Wonder Woman, yeah. She had USA pinned to her cape, and she had on that Dr. Seuss hat, and she was just cavorting. I mean, she was just dancing all around the space. And then, of course, she and Lady Liberty, who had her chains taken off by Rich at that point, and Dana, as the Grim Reaper, had been chained with the same chains and dragged off the stage to the side and sitting in defeat on the sidelines. And so Emily and Lady Liberty and Rich were all just dancing around, and it was just magical. And I just could never have imagined when we first planned it that those key players would just inhabit their roles so beautifully and take on the idea of the going from the mourning to the call to action, to the action, to the celebration, that feeling that you get when you do decide I'm going to do something about this as an American, I'm going to speak out in the public space or move in the public space to declare that this is what needs to happen in our society, in our country. And they were just such a wonderful part of having that happen. And there were many others too. The part I took was one of my fellow tombstone carriers and I did a great job too. Again, we didn't know exactly how we would pull it off. We knew what our action would be, that we would walk slowly, appearing to mourn, holding up the tombstone, showing what freedom of our country was being threatened, whether it was free speech or loss of benefits or whatever it was. And so I was carrying mine that said, "Rest in peace, democracy." But as John's music began to play, his dirge that he had adapted for the occasion from something he had composed many years ago, it kind of took over the whole group of us. And we had it in the script that if the tombstone carriers felt like it, they could sing along or appear to mourn or cry out. And it was very powerful. The music was kind of echoing there in that space, the walls of the mall, as we were walking along, and we could see the solemn faces of the people, of course, holding up their cell phones to take pictures of it and looking very thoughtful and kind of moved. And the tombstone carriers started kind of singing along with the dirge, wailing voices and crying out. And I looked back briefly behind me to see how everybody was doing. And some of them had out tissues that actually were crying as they marched. So the powerful group energy that was generated surprised me. Not that it would happen, because I wanted it to happen, but the depth and intensity and power of it was just really beautiful. So I want to shout out our tombstone carriers too, because they really got into their role and added to the power of the performance.
And most of that wasn't rehearsed. They kind of had some general cues, never had practiced it, and improv.
Yeah, Isabelle had meetings, some of which I was involved in, with various participants. We let John handle the musicians. We didn't have meetings in advance with them, and he handled it beautifully. But we did have meetings with the Wonderground. We stayed in close touch with the Charlottesville Women's Choir, who also were presenting songs, to make sure that they were all good and understood what they were to do. I drew a map in advance of the space showing where everybody would march in to the what I call the omni space, the octagonal space there, where they would stand, and then where they would exit on the way back. But we had never had an actual rehearsal with the whole group of people. We wanted to, but again, Isabelle said, "I know we just don't have time for that, and so I'm going to arrange these smaller meetings with the different groups of participants." So we had met in advance with the pallbearers, had their own little meeting of what they were going to do. They did a great job. As I said, I think the tombstone carriers had their separate meeting, but not an actual rehearsal per se. The script suggested that they could mourn or cry out if they wanted to. And boy, they got into it. Like I said, it all came together in an amazing way.
It sure did. So how were you feeling the night before, the day of, the day after? Where were you doing all this emotionally?
As the whole thing developed, there were ups and downs, there were hiccups, and then somehow it would all get handled. We would get back to being confident again and carrying on again. For me, at least during the last 2 days before the whole thing, I was pretty calm. I felt like, again, hats off to Isabelle for all her advanced planning and her ability to think about the structure of everything that was involved organizationally, where people would need to be, how the props and costumes would be distributed on that day. Oh, the dance rehearsals. Susan McCulley, the choreographer, had prepared a video in advance with the movements that people were to make on the stage. And so that was distributed to the potential participants who were going to be the tombstone carriers, who would then transform into the dance of activism, I guess we would call it, during Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, the movements that they would make. And then our next song would be This Little Light of Mine, where they had already transformed and had seen the vision of the positive future and their part in it. We had the little tea lights. That was my idea. Everybody had a little tea light in their packet that they got when they got their tombstone and their costume. And so they were able to pull those out. But again, none of that we had been able to practice in advance. So that all happened pretty seamlessly, I think, and pretty well. But as far as how I was feeling, the 2 days prior, I was like, okay, we got this. We don't have everything ironed out. There are a couple of little things I'm not sure how they're going to go, but overall, we were feeling pretty good. But I know we both had dreams the night before about it, had a little trouble sleeping. And my dream was that we had to have an Invisibility Brigade banner in the parade. I remember in my sleep, I was running around saying to people, oh, we forgot to put the Visibility Brigade banner in the parade. And they were looking at me puzzled, like, we're not going to do that. And I was like, yes, we've got to do that. So, but when I woke up, I was like, okay, just calm down. Everything's going to be fine. And then, of course, that day, even though we had prepared in advance, and had all the props, in the proper place and the little packages to pass out to the people. There were little hiccups, certain people didn't show up and then other people stepped in. Sure, I'll put on a black outfit and carry a tombstone and do what you all do. Okay, just tell me where to be and what to do.
That was the day of, just last minute
Stuff. Yeah, just trying to pass out the costumes and get everybody into the costumes. They had to put them on over their heads and get them adjusted and then put something on their heads. The men just could put on hats, but the women had to wear the mantillas that Catholics, especially Hispanic Catholics, Latino Catholics, use to wear on their heads when they go to Mass. We had those and to put on and get fixed. And then we had to hide the beads underneath. Everybody was told to wear colorful clothing underneath this costume that we would give them. And we wanted to add to that by giving them beads that they were supposed to tuck down under their costume. So all these things were planned and we were trying to carry them out. And of course, people were asking questions at the last minute. We had a last minute practice. Susan gathered together all the people who had arrived early because they wanted a little last minute practice. And we were doing some last minute practice on the moves that the people had looked at in the video, but there were still questions. Wait a minute, what are we going to do when? What's happening there? I realized a lot of people were still not understanding, even though we had tried real hard to explain in advance, that a lot of people were still not understanding. So I was kind of like, okay, we don't have a complete understanding here of what we're going to do, but we got to do it. So let's do it. So that's what we did. Once it started, I knew it was all going well, as I said, because I could see the faces of the people who were watching, and I could feel the power of it in myself and in the other marchers and in the music. I knew it was going to carry on, and it did. So afterward, just a feeling of just relief. We just pulled it off, and gratification that it did move people. It did have a powerful effect on people that we hoped it would, apparently to an even greater degree than we had thought possible.
A huge success.
Beyond our wildest dreams, as they say. I think that's a Moody Blues quote, isn't it?
Yeah, that was da-da, da-da. I can't remember how that's
thinking about our fortunes
and the story that is
that we're really not to blame.
Search of a Lost Chord, I think.
Yeah, and I'm going to get emotional on the Lost Chord. Yeah, it's great. I love it. Listen to the tide slowly turning.
Da, da, da.
Hush all our heartaches away. We're part of the fire that is burning. From the ashes, we will build another day. I mean, what could be greater than that?
Had you been thinking of that song?
I've been thinking a lot of the old songs that, from my earliest protest days. Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth. Stephen Still's song about
police riots in L.A.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, because they brought in the National Guard at the University of Alabama. We played it a lot because, there's a man with a gun over there. And it was my junior year when Kent State, when those 4 people were killed by the National Guard. We had National Guard on our campus. So who knew what was going to happen? Luckily, there wasn't more carnage than that at the time. And anyway, I bring that up to say that many of the songs that were popular in those days came back to me as we were planning this.
Now that it's done, how are you feeling about it?
tired, I will say, but also getting some ideas for some future actions we can take. Looking back on it, for me, the whole process was a tremendous personal growth experience, doing something that I never dreamed that I would do and doing it successfully and seeing that I can work together with other people to make a difference in people's lives for the good. So it was a labor of love.
Clearly no regrets.
Oh, no, no regrets at all.
The first effort was a real hit it out of the park.
Mhm.
Win one for the good guys.